It's close to the part of my line. What, my spiffy shirt over here isn't going on? No.
Jared Thomas, Oscar Fernandez. 14th Circuit Court resumes. Please be seated. Mr. Willis?
Let's roll. Yes, sir. People of the state of Michigan call Ryan Hehouse to the stand.
Please raise your right hand. You swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please have a seat. State and spell your name.
My name is Ryan Heedhouse. It's RyanHeethuis.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Who do you work for?
The U.S. Secret Service.
And how long have you been so employed with the Secret Service?
I've been with the Secret Service going on 7 years now, employed as a investigative analyst.
Okay. And did you, was your services or the services of the Secret Service asked to assist in some of these investigations?
It was.
In particular, the Jessica Herringa disappearance?
Yes.
And also with respect to Rebecca Bletch?
Correct.
And Madison Nygaard?
Yes.
Why, I guess my first question to you is, why would the Secret Service get involved in something like this?
Yes, so most people, when they think of the Secret Service, they think of our protective missions, so they think of, protecting the president, the vice president, their families. So, for instance, when the president, if he were to come to Muskegon, we then rely on our local partners because they're a lot more familiar with the area, so they'll know, the roads and local contacts. We rely on them to help us, ensure that protective mission is successful while they're here. So part of what we have in that is we've got a lot of technical capabilities, forensic capabilities. So on kind of the back end, when locals have cases where we can then help them out, we try to then give back to them because they are so helpful with us when it comes to the protective side of our mission.
And your specialty is what?
Investigative analyst, that kind of, it's a wide array of things. So I do financial analysis, cell site analysis. In this particular case, the most prominent thing I used was we call link analysis. So we're dealing with big sets of data and linking them together to try and find investigative leads.
Okay. Now, as it relates to the investigation involving Jessica Herringa,
Yes.
What was your assignment?
So when I first came over to help out the task force, I was briefed on the case and kind of what they had at that point. So at that point, they had information that there was a silver van, that there's potentially linked to a Walther P22 handgun, and then we also had dumped the cell tower information kind of near that scene. So initially, I'm trying to piece all those things together to try and find leads. So I'm tying together, who owns the gun that also has, a van registered at the same address and trying to provide those leads. Same thing with the cell towers. I'm trying to find people that were in the area on their cell phone that also may have a silver van. So that's all then passed on to the investigators to follow up on. And then kind of in addition to that is they're getting tips as it comes in. So any way that I can help with trying to further those tips, or, if they say, hey, we get this, so-and-so has a silver van, we think he might have been around there, then I will then take that and I would run it and see, do they own a gun? Is their cell phone present on any of those towers? Things like that.
Okay, so breaking that down just a little bit, as you mentioned, the importance of a silver van in this gun piece that was linked to a Walther P22, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, in your link analysis, I assume, well, I guess you tell me or tell the jury, did you have a specific van or vans that you were using as that part of the link, and then you were matching it to registered gun owners?
Correct. So I was, we were looking at that time, we were looking at either a Dodge Caravan or a Town and Country. So at that point, we had gotten from Secretary of State requested anybody in the state that had either of those two vans registered. So I believe it was like 120,000 Town and Country and around 85,000 Dodge Caravans. I mean, we're talking about a pretty large number. So we're taking all of those and those registered addresses, so only the registered gun owners, and there was just over 15,000 individuals that had that gun registered in the state of Michigan. So we're piecing together those addresses, and I don't know the exact number, but I know it was, around 100 where we actually had some matches, and every single one of those were followed up on by investigators.
Okay, so in order to be part of your analysis, you own either a Dodge Caravan or a Town and Country.
Correct.
Silver in color.
It was actually all the vans, but yes, I mean, if we found any matches, I would then pare it down to say, okay, was it silver? But yes.
Gotcha. All right. And a registered owner of a P-22 Walther handgun.
Correct.
All right. So, for example, if you didn't have one or the other, you weren't making your list, essentially. That wasn't being
Right.
linked.
Right. So if you didn't have the van, you wouldn't connect on the list, and if you didn't have a registered handgun, it wouldn't.
That was kind of my question. So, if you had the handgun but you didn't register it, you're not coming up on that list.
No.
Okay. And I'm assuming that as the picture that you painted was one that you kind of carried through the course of this investigation.
It did. So for the next, several years, I mean, I was in constant contact with Lieutenant Casher trying to develop any fresh leads, and then that evolved into the other investigations as those came along as well.
Okay. Working kind of, I guess, in chronological order, when the Rebecca Bletch investigation popped up about a year and a half or so later, at that point in time, were you able to make any links to that investigation and the Jessica Herring investigation?
Now, at that time, I mean, there was no indication that there was a van present at the scene. We didn't have any cameras or witnesses at that point that the van was relevant. We did look at the cell towers between the two locations, but there was nothing present that gave us anything to go on to link those together at that time.
So you were continuing to use your specialty, i.e. this link analysis, as well as cell site data during the Bletch investigation as well.
Correct. So we're looking at that point, I was kind of looking at as independently. At that point, we were looking. So I'm doing the same things on that case, trying to link different pieces of evidence that could potentially be linked to individuals, but not necessarily between the two cases, because at that point we didn't have too much that was pointing in that direction.
Okay. Now, fast forwarding again, another year and a half or so to Madison Nygaard.
Yes.
When were you contacted, and what were you asked to do?
Yeah, so in the immediate days following, I was contacted by Detective Willis, and she had indicated that they had identified a video from, actually, I think at this point they may have been before the video or after the video, but they had information that a silver van was involved. So knowing that I had done all of this stuff in the hearing investigation, so I was familiar with the process, she'd reached out to me to try and kind of replicate that to see if we could go through it again. So she'd reached out at that point.
Okay. And at some point in time, were you provided with either stills or video of this Blueberry Farm video?
I was.
And I want to show you a couple of exhibits that are going to pop up in front of you there. First and foremost, this is People's Exhibit 62. What are we looking at in this photograph?
That is a front view of what appears to be a silver Dodge Caravan.
All right. And was this something that you were using or had as part of your initial analysis?
It was.
Now, the red arrows, what was the significance of that?
So I got information from the investigators that that radio antenna on top of the van may be significant. So when I reached out later in the process, they thought that'd be significant to help narrow down the pool of vans we would be looking at.
Okay. People's Exhibit 63. What?
So yeah, so that's the same van, just kind of the next frame from the previous image.
Okay. And finally, People's Exhibit 64.
And that's same video. It's the side profile of the van.
Okay. Now, taking all the information you had, did you work with anybody else in trying to determine or narrow down the potential owner of that van?
I did. So at that point, I had received all the data back from Michigan Secretary of State. So like I said before, with the Dodge Caravans, we're talking about 80,000 vans in that initial pool of vans. So at that point, I'm cleansing the data. So all of that has personal identifiers. So I don't want to include, names, addresses, all of those things. So we cleanse out that data, and then we're sending off to FCA, which is Fiat Chrysler, which does Dodge and Chrysler, just the VINs, because I want to send to them and say, okay, I want anything that's silver in color, so that would bring us down to 32,000 vans. And then I also pointed out sent them these images, but pointed out the antenna we thought might be significant, and sent them these images, said, is there anything else you can narrow down the pool further? That would be great assistance. So that's at that point I sent along just a mass list of just VIN numbers, which is the vehicle identification number that each vehicle has.
Now, how is it, or how did you work getting down to specific color?
So that is all done by, in this case, was all done by FCA, Sophia Chrysler. So the Secretary of State data does not have color in it. So we just get the mass list. So I could get it, but you'd have to individually run each one. So it's a manual process, very labor intensive, obviously. So that's all done by FCA. So when I send it, they're able to link to their back-end data and say, okay, here's the color of the van when it came off of our assembly line.
All right. Now, obviously working a little bit in conjunction with our locals, or the State Secretary of State, as well as Chrysler, can you describe for the jury exactly what you did or how you were able to narrow it down, the process?
Yes. So at that point, the list that I then got back from FCA was a list of, I think, 354 vans that would be statewide that were silver in color, would have been outfitted with this Sirius radio antenna, and then I think they also cued in on the wheels as possibly being unique to narrow it further, and I think the long wheelbase. But they were able to narrow it down to 354 vans statewide. So then, from that point, I then took it, because that's still a lot of vans to try and follow up on. So I mapped it in the greater Muskegon area. I did the zip code starting in 494. So it's going to be probably a 30-mile area of Muskegon, and we got down to, I believe, 30 vans, and there was a handful of those that fit the description of the suspect.
Okay. Now, so you basically took a huge list.
Yes.
I think you described it as over 80,000
Correct.
through all this work and whittled it down to 31?
31, yes.
Okay. And is it that list then that you provided to investigators to move forward on?
It was.
Okay. I think I've got People's Exhibit 65. Does that kind of, in some respects, kind of at least give a little nutshell on what you did?
It does.
Okay.
It does.
Now, and ultimately, and I don't know if and maybe you were shared this by investigators, but one of those 31 vans registered to a person by the name of Jeffrey Willis.
Correct.
Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the other work that you did as it relates to some of the video.
Yes.
We've had some testimony about video that has been was obtained by certain businesses, in particular along Old Grand Haven Road. Are you familiar with that? And in particular, I want to show you. One second. Yes, sir. I'll show you what's been marked as People's 196. Hang on one second. Okay. What are we looking at in this photograph?
This would be a aerial map of the area around the Exxon station, and then proceeding north up Old Grand Haven Road.
And the markers, there are four markers here. One being the Exxon station, and then the Michigan Mattress Outlet or May Consulting. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Then further north of that is Old Homestead, right?
Correct.
And then finally, a little further north of that is Boyer Coins.
Correct.
The first question I have for you, are you familiar with the investigators' interest in an address at 3038 Bailey?
I am.
And from your analysis, leaving the Exxon station, what would be the most direct route to go from the Exxon station to that address on Bailey?
Yes, so if you were going on the service drive here and taking a right onto Old Grand Haven Road, so you'd be passing the mattress store, proceeding north up Old Grand Haven Road, the quickest route to 3038 Bailey would be proceeding up up Old Grand Haven Road, getting onto Seaway Drive, taking a right at Getty, right at Summit, and then a right at Bailey.
Again, obviously, with your work with all these task force, you were made aware of the statements made by both Mr. Barber and Ms. Follett
It was?
on where that van turned?
Correct.
Okay, and the direction that it went?
Correct.
Now, in your views of both the May Consulting videos, the Old Homestead videos, and the Boyer Coin videos, were you able to, I guess, when you watched it, were you able to determine how many vans passed through during the time period?
Yes, so throughout the course of the investigation, I've watched all of those videos from start to finish, but then once we kind of had the witness statements and those things, we were kind of at a more narrow time frame. So for the May Consulting, I viewed from 2250 until 2305, and there was, I believe, 23 cars that passed through that surveillance video, and there was only one that appeared to be a van.
Okay. How about the Old Homestead location?
The Old Homestead expanded the time frame a little bit more on that one because it's further away from the Exxon. So I was looking at from 2255 until 2315, and in that video there was 41 vehicles that had passed, and there was only one van.
Finally, the Boyer Coin video.
So the Boyer coin video, as far as looking at how many cars passed by, we didn't look at that, so we used that video more as what we passed along to FCA for vehicle identification. But I did view a 1 minute clip that included the silver van, and there was 2 cars that passed, and only one was a silver van.
Okay. Now, you also recovered as part of your work here. Let me show you this here. This is going to be People's Exhibit 69. Do you recognize this?
I do.
What are we looking at here?
So I had, subsequent to search warrants in this case, one of the search warrants was for a Fifth Third MasterCard, so I had received information from investigators that on the early morning of 4/27/13 there was a transaction at Taco Bell. So to kind of validate that transaction was a legitimate transaction, all those things, I made contact with a fraud investigator with the corporation that handles Taco Bell, who actually was able to put me in touch with the owner who provided us this receipt, which showed the timestamp of, I believe, 12:34 a.m. and the MasterCard there at the bottom ending in 1050 was a match to the records that we had.
Okay, and the owner of that MasterCard was who?
Mr. Willis.
Now, were you made aware of the fact that during a tip investigation, the defendant actually had indicated to both officers that he had actually went to this Taco Bell on Sternberg?
I did.
And that he had left his home, which was on Sheridan, to go to this Taco Bell.
Correct.
Now, I'm not going to assume anything, but did you look into whether or not that the Taco Bell on Sternberg was the closest to his house?
I did. So, I mean, when I initially heard that, I thought it was curious because knowing the area, I mean, there's another one that's right there on Apple Avenue. So we did, I pulled it up to see the distance between the two, and the one from the Sheridan location of the home was just over 2 miles from the home, so about a 5-6 minute drive. And this location here on Sternberg from the home is more of a 12-13 minute drive.
Okay. Now, when you get off of 31 to go to this particular location,
Yes.
which exit is it? The eastbound exit or the westbound exit that you get off on Sternberg?
It would be the eastbound exit.
All right. So you get to the top of the ramp there, and I believe you'd be turning right on Sternberg to head to this particular Taco Bell. Is that correct?
Correct. You're almost kitty corner across the street from where the Exxon gas station would be located.
I guess that's the nature of my question. From there, can you kind of see what's going on at the Exxon?
Absolutely.
So if I understand your testimony correctly, there was a Taco Bell 2 miles from the defendant's home as opposed to this one, which was...
It's almost 7 miles from
7
the
miles.
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other things that you were doing. In particular, for the Jessica Herringa case, what I call, and maybe you call it something else, what I call a proof of life search. And I'm
Correct,
not-
so, yeah, proof of life, signs of life, so kind of, since the beginning of this investigation, every few months, I mean, I was always trying to develop new leads for investigators, so I was running a series of searches that I guess I would kind of break down as commercial, public database type searches, local and state searches, and then federal searches, and then finally, international searches.
Okay, and I'm assuming you have various partners that you are able to work with in order to obtain
Correct.
information?
Correct. So I'll start with the commercial databases. So anytime, you move to a new apartment, new house, you're going to generate a record. You get a new utility bill, it's going to generate a record. You're getting mail at that address. So if you sign up for a magazine subscription, that's going to be a record. Rewards card, grocery store, gas stations, all that stuff that, you think you're signing up to get something from them, they're also getting your information, and that's then provided to these companies where we can run these searches.
Okay, and is that true for all the other partners that you have there?
Yeah, so then continuing on from there, so the local and state searches, those are more going to be law enforcement-based searches. So what I was searching for was any, this is nationwide, looking for any mention of a silver van and a blonde female, any cases with similar case facts, and then obviously any mentions or any signs of Ms. Hiringa. So we're looking for any contact that may have had with police. And then continuing on to the federal searches, those are going to be working with our law enforcement partners where we can run things, border crossings, so that, ever traverse out of the country into Canada, airline things that are both domestic and international. I think that's kind of the federal side, and then continuing on to the international partners, which is, you want me to continue on?
Please.
All right. So then on the international partners, we're looking at both prior to the arrest of the defendant and then after. So prior, we were running things, even though we didn't have any indication that there was any human trafficking, there are partners that can look at those things to see, is there any mention of her, and there's some facial recognition tools so we can share those photos, and it can show, showed up in any videos. And then after the defendant's arrest, we had information that the homicide of Ms. Hiringa may have been recorded, so we then resubmitted again, trying to get any facial recognition on any of these sites that we've started to learn about as we went along in the investigation.
So, in this, let me ask you this, Mr. Hehouse, is this a one-time search? In other words, you search these databases one time, and whatever you get, and that's it?
It's not. So, it wasn't regimented where, the first of every third month I was running them, but I would run them 3-4 times a year, every year since this investigation started.
And have you been continuing to run them even after the defendant was charged in this case?
I have.
And at any point in time, whether it was prior to the discovery of the defendant, after the discovery of the defendant, prior to his arrest, after his arrest, and even during the course of all these other things, have you been able to get a positive result of any kind on any one of those levels involving Jessica Hiringa?
I was not able to get any indication of any sign of Ms. Hiringa.
And obviously, those searches are continuing,
Correct.
right? All right, give me 1 second. Your Honor, before I finish with Mr. Hehouse here, I'm going to move for the admission of People's Exhibit 196, which is a satellite overview picture.
Okay. You received?
I'd also move for the admission of People 62, 63, 64, and Exhibit 69.
62, 3, and 4.
Correct.
And exhibit what?
69.
Okay.
No objection, Your Honor.
Received.
I have no further questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
you want me to continue at this point, or do you want to take care of that other business?
Well, actually, it's just a,
I don't want to break.
yeah.
Go ahead and get across the table.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Hehides. Is it Officer Hehides?
Investigative analyst, but Mr. is fine.
Mr. I think Mr. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Hehides, have you ever heard of a guy by the name of D.B. Cooper?
I've heard the name.
Okay. Just for your elucidation, D.B. Cooper is a guy who hijacked an airplane in 1972, jumped off the back with a parachute, never been heard from again. Does that sound like the familiar?
Is robbery involved?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, hijacking.
Yes.
Got some money, jumped off the
Yes.
plane. And the reason I ask you is about that proof of life scenario that you were talking about. Now, you obviously weren't with the Secret Service in 1972, correct?
I was not.
Oh, okay. However, would not the Secret Service have the policies changed? I mean, wouldn't they have attempted a proof of life for Mr. Cooper, especially since he was a hijacker and whatnot, when they've tried to demonstrate whether or not he's still alive or dead or whatever?
I don't believe that would have been our investigation. That would have been-
But certainly, no, it wouldn't have been your investigation, but you were the Secret Service. That would
Correct.
make sense, wouldn't it? It made sense in this case, right?
Yeah, I mean, as I kind of explained in the beginning, we kind of help out on local cases, but I think that sounds like probably an FBI investigation.
Somebody would have done a proof of life.
Oh, I imagine, yes.
Okay. And to your knowledge, has he ever been found?
No, I mean, I think with those extraordinary resources, I think that would be more difficult to be found.
It's extraordinary resources. Okay. So with extraordinary resources, a person like Mr. D.B. Cooper might be able to just evade detection and live off on some tropical island somewhere and never be found, right?
Certainly possible.
All right. Thank you. Second question. Yeah, the Taco Bell by Mr. Willis's house is about 2 miles away.
Correct.
The Taco Bell he went to that night is about 7 miles away, correct?
Correct.
The Taco Bell he went to that 7 miles away has a Kentucky Fried Chicken attached to it, or the Kentucky Fried with no Kentucky Fried Chicken attached to the one 2 miles away, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. You ever go to a restaurant late at night and you're getting ready to get something to eat and you get there and you find out it's closed?
Oh, certainly.
Okay. So if you're hungry, what do you do?
You get something else.
Yeah. When you were first brought in, they asked you about the vehicles that you were looking for was a silver van, Town and Country, correct, or was it the Dodge all along?
No, I was dealing with the big data set. So from the beginning, I was always looking at both the Dodge and the Chrysler.
All right. You were looking for the Dodge and the Chrysler?
Correct.
Okay. Do you know where the Chrysler came about? How that became an issue?
So I'm certainly not a vehicle expert, but I believe that they're in the same production, same company, so they're similar enough that the witness wasn't sure it was dark. So all I had was a silver van, and I was indicated that it could be either a Dodge or a Chrysler.
You know, I asked a question a minute ago, and I didn't close the loop here. This receipt is from 12:34 in the morning, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. One moment, please. Thank you, Mr. Yasi.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, I am.
On this receipt, is there any chicken or is it all taco?
There's not, and I'm fairly certain that it's the same company. I think it is they're connected where if you went to the window, you could order either.
What time did the Kentucky Fried Chicken open? Was that 19?
I do not know, but as I said, they're connected, so I believe it would be the same time because it's the same company that operates both. The same parent company operates
Well, I
both.
understand that, but
Okay.
do you know that to be a fact? Do you know that they close at the same time? Or that's-
No, I do not. No, I do not.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You may see.
Thank you.
Oh, here she is. All right, we're gonna have to take a break
That's
now. I have 3 other cases I have to attend to. It's gonna probably take 15 minutes, so we'll take a break. Let the jury People versus Hernandez. File 176356, People versus Hernandez. Mr. Wilson.
We have a resolution report, Your Honor, and no additions or corrections. Ask the court to follow the recommendation.
Mr.
Circuit Court resumes. Please be seated.
Okay. Go back and complete versus Willis, who's taking care of those other matters. We're ready to vote our undivided attention to this matter. So we'll be coming next week.
Thank you, Judge. People of the state of Michigan call Lawrence Brooks to the stand.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Please have a seat, state and spell your name for the record.
My name is Lawrence Edward Brooks. First name is spelled Lawrence. Last name is Brookes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Brooks.
Good afternoon.
I'm going to hand you here what's been marked as People's Exhibit 197. Do you recognize that document, sir?
Yes, sir. This is my CV of my background.
Okay. You currently work for who?
I currently work for Fiat Chrysler Automobiles.
And for purposes of your testimony, I'm going to probably refer to them as Chrysler. Is that okay?
That's perfect. Thank
A
you.
little bit easier for me, anyways. What's your current job title with Chrysler?
My current job title is Senior Manager of Product Analysis.
And how long have you worked for the Chrysler Corporation?
My 32nd year anniversary was last week, so 32 years.
Okay. And in particular, do you work in the division or the area that deals with design work and patents on particular vehicles?
Not in that area right now. Today I work and have worked since 2009 in the area of product liability claims and cases brought to the Office of the General Counsel at the car company, where people have claimed product defects or injuries. I am the engineering arm and technical arm to assist our lawyers in interpretation of our vehicles and their design and development over the last 32 years in my case.
Okay. And so I'm assuming that makes you intimately familiar with the designs of Chrysler vehicles, Dodge vehicles over the time period that you've been with Chrysler.
Yes, I'm very intimately familiar with many, many cars that we've built over the years.
Now, you have testified as an expert in your field before, is that correct?
Yes, I have. Many times.
How many times and where?
Well, in court, I have testified twice in Parrish County in down south, and that was identification of vehicles in regards to a criminal matter. I've testified here last October. I've testified in Detroit, identifying vehicles.
And so is it safe to say, based on your education and your experience with the Chrysler Corporation, your expertise in looking at various features of vehicles and making determinations of make and model, you've been qualified as an expert to do that?
I've been qualified in many courts for that function.
And in fact, I think you mentioned you were qualified as such last October here in Muskegon County.
That is correct, right in this very courtroom.
All right, fair enough. Mr. Johnson, did you want to voir dire any further, or are you satisfied?
I'm satisfied.
Your Honor, I move for the admission of Mr. Brooks as an expert in the area of vehicle design for Chrysler Corporation.
He'll be examined as an expert in that field.
I want to talk generally first, Mr. Brooks, and then we'll get into what you specifically did in this particular case.
Okay.
Generally speaking, can you describe for the jurors the role that patents play in vehicle design?
Certainly. So every vehicle manufacturer has designs that they want to sell to the public. So every vehicle that is out there, whether it be a car or a van or truck, is patented for its shape. Much like a Coke bottle is a Coke bottle because that's the shape that's patented. So all of our cars are governed by design patents by our design community.
Now, as an example, then, to the layperson, not recognizing that various aspects of vehicles are patented, can you give the jury examples of features of vehicles, for marketing purposes that might carry a patent so that it's unique to that particular vehicle?
Certainly. One of the ones that many people maybe not know about is a Jeep vehicle has 7 slots in the front end. And that is a patented feature that no other car manufacturer can duplicate. Shapes of headlamps, shapes of tail lamps, shapes of door handles, shapes of glass. There's numerous examples. But shapes are a emotional cue when people are choosing a vehicle to buy or not. You may not even know it, but when you see a vehicle that you like, you say, "Oh, I really like that vehicle." And many of the aspects about that is the particular shape that just makes you like the car very much, or truck, or van.
So, and this idea is true across all car manufacturers?
Absolutely. Every car manufacturer has a patent community and lawyers that they employ. Certainly, every car manufacturer has designers and engineers, and that is your competitive advantage. Is the shape of something that you make, the size of it, the capabilities of it. It's all patentable.
And is that essentially what makes every single vehicle, no matter what year it was made, unique from other vehicles because of those various patents?
Yes, because if somebody was successful in building and designing and selling a particular vehicle, every car manufacturer in the world would say, well, let's just make an exact copy of it and sell it because we'll just, take part of that business. So that's why it becomes a competitive advantage and protected element that a car manufacturer would enter into a United States patent to protect their interests.
Now, is that true for a 2006 Dodge Grand Caravan?
Absolutely, it is.
All right. All right, I'm going to hand you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 198. Can you describe what that is, please?
Yes, this is a United States design patent, patent number D447093-S. It was issued in August 28th, 2001, and it is a design patent of the minivan RS model that we sold from 2001 to 2007.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about the evolution here before I get into some specifics. I'm going to show you, and it's in front of you on that screen, People's Exhibit 70. What are we looking at here, sir?
So this is a side view, of course, left side view, depiction of the different minivans that Chrysler has designed over the years, starting with, in the top left corner, the AS model. In 1984, Chrysler Corporation, back then, invented the minivan. And as a result of that, this is the design shape that was patented and built for nearly 11 years. till 1995. Then it progressed to another newer model, the NS model, that was built from 96 to 2000. Then it was replaced by the RS model, which is 2001 to 2007, and then replaced by the RT model, which is 2008 to 2017.
So each one of those represents a Dodge Caravan, is that correct?
It can represent a Dodge Caravan, and or it could represent a Chrysler Town and Country. But yes, those are model names. They're all considered minivans.
Gotcha. We'll get to the town. I do have some questions on the Town and Country here in just a second, but we'll get to that. So in each one of those different model years, from the AS to the RT, there are particular aspects of each design that carry a patent similar to the one that I've presented to you.
Correct. For each one of these shown here, there's probably several patents. The one that what I forgot to mention on the one that you handed to me, this is a Dodge Caravan, and I know that from the front end of the shape on this particular design patent.
Okay.
It's not as evident in these side view pictures.
Okay. And we'll get to that here in just a second as well, given some of the work you did. Okay, so is it safe to say then, Mr. Brooks, that at least given your experience and your expertise, you look at cars probably a whole lot different than anybody else sitting in this room?
Yes, I mean 32 years in the car design, build, and manufacturing. I look at cars really differently from most people. I look at shapes. What most people don't realize, and I tell this to a lot of people, is most of the time you're looking at a car from the back because you're following cars in traffic. You rarely are staring at them in the front view. So I am constantly looking at vehicles based on my background, my safety development background, my design background, my manufacturing background. I would ask myself strange questions like, well, how did they build that? Or why did they do that? Where I think the layperson would not even recognize a curve, a corner that may be difficult to produce and make. So I truly do look at cars differently.
And I think in some respects, if I remember correctly, you've equated it to, your familiarity with vehicles is somewhat similar to an individual's familiarity with their kids, for example, in a group picture.
Correct. When I look at pictures of cars, photographs of cars, when they're Chrysler cars, I immediately recognize them. I know them. I can tell you what they are. It's an immediate response, like a picture of your kid, like you said, oh, that's my kid.
Okay.
That's how I recognize vehicles.
All right, well, let's talk about the work that Chrysler did in relation to the investigation involving Madison Nygaard. In particular, do you recall your group or your engineers working on helping investigators make a determination based off of some still videos that were provided to you?
Yes, I remember this picture quite well.
All right. Now, we've had some prior testimony from some of the investigators that indicated their work on trying to determine or narrow down the potential owner of that vehicle and what they did with the Secretary of State and then employing the services of the Chrysler Corporation. So could you describe for the jury what work was done on Chrysler's end to help and assist investigators?
Certainly. First, there was just a recognition of this vehicle, and this vehicle is definitely known to anybody that's worked at Chrysler for any length of time, is a Dodge minivan, because the front end has a cross-hatched front end. That is a design cue that is only carried on Dodge vehicles. A Chrysler vehicle would have a solid grille, looks like an eggshell. So that's the first thing. The other thing is this vehicle has black mirrors. It also has a satellite antenna on the roof, and it's also a silver color or white color. That's the immediate things, and one of my engineers was asked to narrow down a list of vehicles of this potential based on a bigger list, and they went through our build records with those kind of design cues and came up with a much smaller list.
Okay, now, obviously you had more than just the front view here. People's Exhibit 64 is a side view, and what can you tell based off of this image, based on
Okay.
your expertise?
Yes, thank you. So on this side view, there are several items that are of great interest. One is this black body side molding and black door handles, number 2. And number 3 is the wheel. So on every vehicle, there's a tire and then there's a wheel. And these in themselves, the wheel, those are patented designs also. So another car manufacturer cannot copy that shape, that design, and there are thousands of different shapes and designs out in the world. But each one of these features would have a specific build code associated with them that will allow one of my engineers in this case to narrow down the possibilities of build.
Now, you mentioned the black molding, and that is that unique to a Caravan, or I guess could you further explain that?
Yeah, so when we build vehicles, we typically offer vehicles in 3 different levels of trim. One is a very low base trim, there's a mid base, and there's a high base trim, and each one of those has a different price break. The lowest trim level carries black body side moldings, black door handles, black mirrors. That is only offered on a Dodge Caravan. The next level is these items here, the body side molding, the door handles, and the mirrors are color-coded to the body color of the car. Those you can get both in a Dodge and a Chrysler. And then the highest level trim is still body color moldings, body color mirrors, but chrome mirrors. Sorry, I said that wrong. The color-coded door handles. Those are only available on a Chrysler Town & Country.
Okay, so the Dodge Caravan does not carry the chrome.
No.
Now, in the Caravan itself, too, is there a uniqueness as it relates to the windows?
Well, every for this year of range of years of minivans, the shape of the windows are the same on a Dodge as it is a Chrysler because the body is of the same shape. What's of particular interest on this vehicle is this back window shape is very unique. It's only built during the periods, the model years of 2001 to 2007.
Okay. Now, the Caravan offered, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but offered 2 different, you had the Caravan and the Grand Caravan.
Correct.
What's the difference there?
So the Grand Caravan, actually the wheels is 4 inches longer. You have a longer wheelbase than a regular Caravan. And this space between the door line of the second sliding door and the wheel opening is 4 inches larger than a Caravan versus a Grand Caravan.
So as we look at this photograph and the photograph previous to that I showed you, where does this fall on the spectrum? Is it an AS, an NS, an RS, or an RT?
This is an RS minivan, model years 2001 to 2007, and then this is a Grand Caravan because of this distance here because of that distance, I just know that.
Now, as part of the analysis you did on this particular event, do you also include, or do you go to and look at a Carfax report?
Well, oftentimes we're asked to look up specifications on particular vehicles. Carfax is a publicly available document that will explain the titling history and service history of any particular vehicle number specified. It is a report that's available to the public at cost. We certainly have an account with Carfax, which is an independent, company. And in this case, I know for a fact that one of my engineers provided a Carfax for a particular VIN requested.
Okay. Give me 1 second. All right, showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 199. You recognize that report, sir?
Yes, this is a Carfax report for a 2006 Dodge Grand Caravan SE, VIN number 1D4GP24R66B734723.
And I know you don't have the VIN number, but the general description, 2006 Dodge Grand Caravan SE, does that resemble that particular photo here that we're looking at? Which is
Yes, that's a RS type minivan, which is exactly this shape of vehicle.
All right. Now, did you also, or were you also asked to lend your, excuse me, expertise as it relates to a video that was obtained by Boyer Coyne?
Yes, I was. I did.
This is in particular, specifically geared towards the Jessica Herring case. And so I'm just going to flip through the three stills here, but People's Exhibit 72, does that look like a still you were asked to review?
Yes, I was.
People's 73,
Yes.
and finally People's 74.
Yes.
All right. I'm going back to 72 here. If there's a better one for your testimony, you can let me know.
I think 73 is a better one.
73. All right. Now, do you recall being asked by, so 73 or 74? This is 74, Mr. Brooks.
73 was better.
All right, 73.
Yep.
Now, you were asked to observe this vehicle and make determinations, if you could, by investigators. Is that right?
That's correct.
And from your expertise and your knowledge base, were you able to make or draw any conclusions from this particular video?
Yes. From the second I saw this video, I knew it was Chrysler minivan. I knew it was a RS type minivan. And the main cue is the back window. I also knew that it was a Dodge minivan because it has black body side moldings, black handles, and black mirrors. That I can see readily from all of my years of experience by just glancing and watching this video for the very first time.
Okay. Now, obviously, and again, I'm not going to assume, but did you watch this over and over and over again to make sure that you were accurate?
I watched it a few times, backwards and forwards.
Now, so based on your 31 years, you are, well, let me ask you this. How sure are you that this is an RS Dodge Caravan?
100% sure.
And are you able to make a determination as to whether or not it is a regular Caravan or a Grand Caravan?
I was able to determine it's a Grand Caravan due to the distance of the back wheel opening, if I can stand.
You may, yes.
Back here to the perceived rear door opening, its length.
Okay. So you were able to make that determination based on the black side molding,
Correct?
correct?
Correct.
I think you said the black door handles.
Correct. And the black mirrors.
Black mirrors. And the shape of that black mirror, it has that kind of teardrop, or I don't know how you would classify it, shape.
Aerodynamic.
Aerodynamic, thank you. And so, if I understand your analysis of this, you are convinced 100% that this is an RS Dodge Grand Caravan manufactured between the years of 2001 and 2007.
That is correct, because only a Dodge Grand Caravan was available with those three elements. Chryslers were not, Chrysler Town and Country to be exact, were not available in that combination.
Okay, and that leads me to my next question. There's been some conversation and testimony about whether or not, investigators were looking for a Town and Country. And it's your testimony, sir, that there's no way that is a Town and Country.
100% that is a Dodge Grand Caravan. I wouldn't even consider that thought.
Okay. Now, I want to just specifically talk about a couple of specs on the Dodge Grand Caravan that year, the RS. All right, this is People's Exhibit 200, and I will publish this for the jury here after we're done. But what are we looking at in that photograph?
Well, this here again is the left side view of the minivans we've built over the years of 1984 all the way through 2017. And I was asked to provide a height from the bottom of the tires, which is ground level, up to the top of the front door. This point here, coincident with this sideline, and then a point where the windshield glass and the door meet the very highest point.
All right, so two locations height-wise, from the ground to the, and again, maybe you could point it out, on the right side, ground to...
Well, ground being where the ground touches these tires, up through where the back of the glass runs straight up, and it's the very highest point in a side view, and also the point where the front windshield glass meets the profile of the roof as it's sloping down forward.
Okay. Now, based on the heights, I guess, let's start with the far right side. How high from the ground to the top of the right side of that windshield, driver's side windshield?
So this point here is what we're talking about. I called it point A. That is 67.04 inches, which is a bit over 5 feet.
So essentially 5 feet 7 inches.
Correct.
Okay. Now going to the other point that you measured.
This point here, I labeled as point B when I was asked to calculate it, and that point was 63.5 inches, so 5 foot 3.5 inches.
5 feet 3.5 inches. Okay.
Yep.
All right, give me 1 second here, Mr. Brooks. All right, bear with me, because I got to admit a few exhibits here with you. Take this out. All right, I'm going to start with your CV. Your Honor, I move for the admission of People's 197, which is Mr. Brooks's CV.
Objection received.
Move for the admission of People's Exhibit 198, which is the design patents that he testified about for the Dodge Grand Caravan RS version.
Objection received.
Move for the admission of People's Exhibit 199, which is the Carfax report.
Objection received.
And move for the admission of 200, which is the design patent page with the 2 points of measurement.
Objection received.
All right, then also, Judge, I'm going to move for the admission of People's Exhibit 70 through 74, which are photographs.
Objection received.
And I'll be honest with you, Judge, you can tell me if I've already admitted these, but 62 through 64.
Yes, those are already in.
Okay. I think. That's it. There's no further questions.
Yeah, Your Honor?
You may.
Because when you bring up Exhibit 200 again for me, please.
You
Good
got it
afternoon,
right
Mr.
up
Brooks.
Good afternoon.
Right up there.
How are you? Oh, that's 200H, isn't that the one with the diagram?
Yeah, I don't have the measurements on it, but I'll bring it back.
Okay. Well, the exhibit's right up here, like as you said. Mr. Brooks, show you was marked exhibit and admitted as exhibit number 200. That's the one where you said, you gave, it's up there. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. You mentioned point A and point B.
Correct.
Point B is at 5'3" tall.
5 foot 3.5 inches tall, yes.
Okay. So if my head, if that vehicle's between us and I'm at point B, for you to see my entire head, my chin's gonna have to be at least 5'3". The vehicle's standing right between us. I'm at point B. For you to see my entire head, how high is my chin gonna have to be?
Are you standing behind the car or in
Yes, sir.
front of the car?
Behind it.
No, I won't see your chin.
You're misunderstanding my question. If you're sitting there, the vehicle's sitting here, I'm standing directly behind point B, how high will my chin have to be for you to see my entire head from over the vehicle?
It would be at the 63 inches.
About 5'3",
That's- yeah.
3.5 inches,
Yeah.
correct?
Yes.
Same thing for point A. I think you got what I'm trying. Point A, same example. How high will my chin have to be for you to see my entire head?
67 inches.
Okay. So my chin's going to have to be at 5'7".
I suppose so.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Brooks. You received a request from law enforcement of some nature to take a look at these issues, did you not?
What issues are you referring to,
The
sir?
ones you've been testifying to.
Oh, yes.
Okay. You received a request.
Yes, sir.
Correct. And when you received the request, were you briefed on what had been, what they had at that point? Did they try to fill you in with as much information as they had at that point, as far as you know?
When I was first approached with many of these things that I was asked to look at, I was not briefed with all the details.
And it was a terrible question anyway. What did you know? Do you know if you were the first person they asked about this, or had they asked other experts or other knowledgeable persons before they talked to you?
Well, I know I wasn't the first person to be asked because one of my engineers did some work prior to being asked.
And were you informed that someone else had identified this vehicle as a Town and Country?
I was never informed of this vehicle
never
being a
informed of that?
town of country, no.
Okay. Do you know if they talked to someone before you? Or you answered that. They did talk to somebody else before you, correct? One of your engineers?
They talked to one of my engineers to identify a vehicle based on its characteristics.
Do you know if they'd spoken to anyone else before him or her? Not to be sexist here.
At the time that you're asking me, no, I did not, I was not aware of who was talked to or who was asked.
Were you ever informed that somebody else had identified this vehicle as a Town and Country?
I had been told that somebody stated it was that,
Okay.
but never was given a name or a person that I would say I could remember here.
No, I wouldn't expect so. Thank you, Mr. Brooks. One moment, please. Mr. Brooks, is your background in engineering?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so you understand the issues involved with perspective. And here's, give me an example. I talked to you about points A and B, right?
Correct.
And how I'd have to be 5'7" for point A, for you to see my chin would have to be at least 5'7".
Correct?
Correct? Now, that would assume that you're standing and we're the same height and you're looking straight at me, correct?
It would be assuming we're standing on the same level ground.
Right. Suppose you're lower than me.
I would have a different perspective.
You'd have a different perspective, and my chin would have to be higher than that 5'7" for you to see that whole chin. I mean, my whole face, correct? I mean, if you're looking up from the ground, or say you're looking up from a motorcycle seat, you're sitting on your motorcycle and you're looking up at me, then from you to see my entire face, it's not the 5'7" we're talking about, it's whatever that angle is plus the 5'7", correct?
That would be correct. It would be an aspect of perspective.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Just a couple follow-up. Certainly, angle of vehicle, I mean, Mr. Johnson's example, he's got the vehicle between you and him versus if the vehicle is on an angle and being looked at that way, there's a different perspective altogether too, isn't that correct?
Correct.
I mean, everything is about, and distance plays a role in that, I would imagine?
Absolutely. The further away, the more the angle is pronounced.
Okay. Now, would it be easy for a civilian to mistake a Dodge Caravan with a Town and Country?
Absolutely. It's done every day.
In fact, if a civilian is familiar with a Town and Country, can you see them actually making that assessment?
Yes, especially if they're looking at the rear end of this vehicle. The rear end of these vehicles are exactly the same. They're only delimited by actual trim lettering on it. The actual shape is exactly the same from the rear.
Now, I just want to clear up maybe some confusion. The engineer that worked on this case, that engineer actually worked on the NIGARD stuff. In other words, the color photographs we showed from the blueberry field. Is that right?
Correct.
And that same engineer is the one that you testified to that helped narrow down that VIN list based on the same observations that you made, making that blueberry field video a Dodge Caravan as opposed to a Town and Country.
Correct.
Not that engineer wasn't even identifying a Town and Country, correct?
No, that engineer would know immediately that was a Dodge. He worked on that platform for many years, just based on the front end.
Thank you. I have nothing.
Nothing further, let's go. Thank you, sir. You may stand down.
People of the state of Michigan call Lieutenant Mike Casher.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please have a seat and state and spell your name for the record.
It's Lieutenant Michael Kasher, M-I-C-H-A-E-L, Kasher with a K, K-A-S-H-E-R.
All right, just give me a second here, Lieutenant. Excuse me. What department do you work for, sir?
Work for the Norton Shores Police Department.
And how long have you been so employed with the North Shore Police Department?
About 28 years now.
And currently your rank is lieutenant, is that right?
That's correct.
And back in April 26 of 2013, what were your duties?
I was a detective sergeant, which means I oversaw the detective bureau for our department.
Now, on that particular night, on August 22nd, 2013, you recall being, I guess, called maybe at home about a situation that happened at the Exxon station.
That's correct. I was called at home April
And-
26th. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. And that Exxon station is located here in Muskegon County?
It is in our city of Norton Shores, yes.
Now, when you got the phone call, I guess the first question I have is, did you have any idea what you were kind of walking into?
No, I got the call from Lieutenant, or he's now Lieutenant Poole, but at the time Sergeant Poole. He was on the road and they responded to the call. It was basically an open door that was left open at the gas station. That's how the call came out. At that point, they were on scene for probably about a half hour, and they felt they wanted me to come out and look at it. Looked a little suspicious, more than just an open door. So that was the information I was given, that the worker that was supposed to be there was no longer there.
Now, when you got on scene, were you able to, let's talk about the interior of the store, were you able to walk the interior of the store?
Yes, even though I was told that they've gone through it a couple of times. As an investigator, being first on, on the scene, you want to walk through it yourself, just to see if you can point anything out or observe any of the stuff. So, yeah, we did a inspection inside the gas station.
Now, there's been some testimony from some of your colleagues that were first responders on the scene about the condition of the interior. So let me ask you specifically, do you recall seeing whether or not there were any signs of any kind of struggle on the inside of the store?
No, there was not. Based on the pictures and based on what I have in my report, that when we went through it, you could see that the person, knowing now it's Jessica Herringill, but she was in the process of cleaning up. And that means that the bathrooms were being cleaned, the garbage was just emptied, and I did notice a different couple piles of dirt or debris where you sweep up, and she hadn't just put it in the dustpan yet. Garbage was at the back door. Looked like she was planning to, wrap it up, do the further duties, but it was a very clean environment.
There's been some question about whether or not she had mopped the floor or anything of that nature. Do you recall making any of those observations?
She had not mopped the floor yet. She was still in the process of actually sweeping, getting the debris up, and then they mopped the floor, as I was told by their procedure, and that hadn't happened yet.
This picture, this is People's Exhibit 78. This is, I think, the only back exit to the store, is that correct?
That's correct.
And is this how you observed the, for instance, the garbage can, and it looks like next to the garbage can is one of those dustpan type things?
That's correct.
All right. People 78, or excuse me, 79. What are we looking at in this photograph, sir?
This is the till that was taken out, placed by Ms. Herringill at that point in time. Its procedure, basically by closing that, they count the money, deposit the money in the safe right there for the owner that would have came in the morning, or the person opening it up. And it looks exactly
like it did right there.
Now, were you present, at some point in time, the owner of the Exxon station showed up, is that correct?
That's correct.
And were you present when he showed up?
Yes, sir.
His name was what?
Fred Searman.
Now, were you with Mr. Searman when he checked on this particular cash drawer?
Yes, sir. Like anything else, they came up to the store. We required them to come up to the store. You're trying to figure out if she just left, did a robbery occur, something missing. We wanted to know the normalcy. I know it was a clean environment, but we still wanted to know the normalcy of the store. And Fred did come up along with Susan Follett. And yes, he did count the money at that time. Fred did.
And did he indicate to you that he needed to make a report about money missing from the store?
No, one of the things he reported to me was the money appeared to be all there. And since that time, since that information, he's never reported that it's missing or anything like that, or it was shorted.
Similarly, did they do a check to see if any product was stolen? Start with food and beverages.
Yes, sir. So we went through the coolers. We went up and down the aisles. Again, along with Susan Follett, because she's supposed to open up in the morning, and then Mr. Searman. Nothing appeared to be missing or gone at that point in time, and they've never since reported anything further down the line.
How about tobacco products? Did this store sell cigarettes?
Yes, it did, and lotto tickets.
Any lotto tickets or cigarettes missing?
Nothing.
Hold on 1 second here. People's Exhibit 80. What are we looking at in this particular photograph?
Okay, this is the back room, so you have the cash, or the cash counter, and then you go in the back. So this would be towards the west side, and then that's kind of where they stock things. And then in the far back is the office door, which was locked at the time. That was one of the reasons we had Mr. Searman come up. It's basically his office where he keeps his accounting, the computer, and his books, I believe, back there.
Now, did you find anything that you were able to identify as belonging to Jessica Herringa?
Yes, sir. A jacket that was hanging right there, and then also her purse was hanging.
And did you examine the contents of the purse?
Yes, we took the purse down and took through, looking through it. Basically, just an inventory. Found all her keys to her cars, her car, her wallet that contained maybe just over $400, cards, debit cards, and her ID, Michigan ID, which is her license, and insurance cards.
So did it appear as though anything that would identify her was missing? I think you said that her driver's license was there, credit cards all present.
There's a lot of stuff in the purse, so there didn't appear to be anything missing. And anything of real value, such as money or debit cards or something like that, was still there.
Okay. Now, at some point in time, sir, was your attention drawn to the outside of the store?
Once we got done looking through all that, we then went outside. Corporal Hooksema, who testified earlier, wanted to show me where he thought there was some blood and what looked like a part of a gun and two battery watches.
Okay. Now, this is People's Exhibit 84. Does that represent two batteries, the gun cover, the sight cover, I guess, and I believe the blood stain too, is that correct?
That's correct. So this would be your blood stain right here. That's the battery cover. That's one of the battery watches.
Now, were you able to observe and collect any other physical evidence than what we see in this photograph?
No, that was it. The blood was not that big. It was into the ground. We had to swab it, or at least Corporal Hooksema swabbed it. Two battery watches that we had by that, in that scene, in the battery cover right there. After that, we did check around, further check for blood drops, leading from the door out.
looked for at the door frame, anything that may be torn clothing, around the windows, in the front door. We didn't locate anything.
Now, this particular gas station sits in kind of, I won't say isolation, but there's land in between it and the next retail space, if you will. Were you able to canvass the area?
Well, we held off canvassing. I mean, we looked around that area. There's a car wash that's kind of connected next door. Went next door, kind of kept in the cement area of it because we called a K-9 unit to come out. And based on that, we didn't want to be walking around in the fields in case we were messing up the scent. So a K-9 unit from the Michigan State Police was called out there to assist us on searching that area.
And were you present when that K-9 officer and the K-9 were actually searching that area?
Yes, I was. Trooper Bush came out. He had the dog at the time. Gave him a description of what we were looking for, the background on it. And then from that point on, he searched the areas, both, north, east, west, and south, being the center point would be the gas station. And that goes into a field. And then along a fence line that has a water, a ponder, I'd say, and then along the railroad tracks, and then across the street.
And did the trooper or the K-9 give you any indication or positive information about potential direction of travel, anything like that?
He basically said at the end, he was out there for quite a while, and as we were doing our investigation and I was interviewing people, he came back, I don't know, we're talking a couple hours. He said basically he felt that the scent ended right where we have the blood and we have the cover to the laser sight. He said he did not find any scent out in that field and then in the front at all.
Now, were you also made aware of the fact that Ms. Harrington's automobile was still at the location?
Yes, sir. It was out front, as previously testified to. In that spot exactly, so we ran the plate number. One of our officers had the plate number ran, and it came back, registered to Jessica. We looked at it. It was locked up. The keys were still with the purse, meaning it was in the purse. There was stuff in the car, in the trunk. But before we did that, we looked at anything that was possibly could have, somebody trying to get into it, or was she trying to get to the car? And that means any blood, if there was any blood on the car or near the door in that area, or any torn clothing or anything that looked like, being disturbed. And again, we found nothing.
Now, you obviously have been sitting with me throughout the course of this trial and heard the testimony of Craig Harpster, the individual that observes the store empty or vacant and makes the call to 911. You recall that?
That's correct, sir.
Now, you remember, or did you record in your report the time that call came in?
Well, it's in my report because it's based right with our system. So when dispatch gets the call, it's automatically put part of our, the complaint number. I don't put it into myself. So when I look at my report, the actual call came in and was, I believe, 14 minutes after 11. And then you see the dispatch time would have been to Officer Ginka at the time, which was basically immediately at 14 minutes after 11.
Okay. So essentially, and obviously Mr. Harpster testified as to what he did prior to making that phone call, and ultimately dispatch logs the call at 11:14 p.m.
That's correct.
Now, obviously, as you are trying to gather as much information as you can, does that Exxon station become kind of a hub for law enforcement at this point? I mean, are there more than just you and officers out there?
Yes, sir. On the scene was me, and it was, at that time, Sergeant Poole, and Corporal Hooksma, Officer Ginka, and then Trooper Bush arrived in the MSB marked truck, SUV type thing for his dog. So you have at least 4 cruisers, and then you have me out there, but I was in a plainclothes car.
And do folks have their flashers going and whatnot? Does it look like a bustle of law enforcement activity?
No, I mean, there's a lot of people there, and then you have more cars showing up. You have Mr. Searman and then Susan Follett and there. So, but we didn't have flashers going at that point in time.
Okay.
But you have officers out there with flashlights, maybe a spotlight going, helping.
And how long is that entourage? I mean, obviously, call comes in at 11:14. First officer's dispatched there. Do you remember what time you arrived?
Arrived between midnight and quarter after, some in that area.
Okay. So you're just getting going at about 12:15, 12:20.
Maybe a little earlier than that, but
Okay.
yes, I'd say.
All right. And the other individuals that you mentioned are all showing up right around that time, or maybe they were already there by the time you got there?
Everybody, all the officers were already on the scene other than Trooper Bush. She wasn't quite there yet, but the other officers, as I mentioned, they were already on scene.
Okay. Now, what time do you remember leaving that scene that night?
After doing all the, preliminary interviews, and then we did go out and did a search. I had a trooper go out and do a search out in Kent City. I contacted my lieutenant at the time and told him and updated him what we had. I left probably between 4:30 and 4:45 in the morning. I left the scene itself.
At what point in time, Lieutenant, did you feel as though you had something a little bit more serious going on?
Started boiling up that based on what Susan Follett had told me at the scene, the same type of story she testified to here. We have a battery cover. We have possible blood at the scene. Battery watches in the person that's not around. And then we contacted her boyfriend, or at the time the person she was living with, Dakota. He had not heard from her since 10 o'clock. And I felt that we had a serious situation, and by 6 a.m., I was kind of given it a time frame, maybe hoping she would come back, give a call to her boyfriend, her mom, or somebody, and that didn't happen. And I basically kind of knew when I left the scene we have a bad situation. So around 6, I'd say in the morning, I contacted my chief. He asked me if I'm absolutely sure, and I said, yeah, I'm pretty positive based on what I have. Then I made the call to, at that time, Detective Lieutenant Cam Hankey from the Michigan State Police, and asked for assistance.
And did you get it? Did you get that assistance?
Yes, I did. He immediately told me that he would have two sergeants come out to the Norton Shores Police Department, start setting up a task force, and help me get it organized. At that point in time, I contacted my lieutenant, Lieutenant Gale, and he said that he would start getting people in. And by, I'd say 8:30, I was back at the police department with the MSP detectives, and by 10:30, 11 o'clock, we probably had 20 people in working the case.
Okay. Besides state police, what other agencies got involved?
Immediately, I'd say the state police, Muskegon County Sheriff's Department. We've had officers from Muskegon Police Department, and different people on that first day was probably the main people.
All right. Ultimately, did the task force grow to the point where you were beginning to receive tips or leads as this thing was rolling?
Yes. So our department, knowing that it was going to get big on this, which I'll be honest with you, I didn't know how big it was going to get. That's why you bring in other people to help you. At that time, Sergeant Davis from the MSP, he had been through something like this before. He'd come in and he helped me set up the rapid start system, where you take in the tips and then you enter that stuff into the system. I think it was now Captain Jim Christensen was on scene helping us to set different things up. As far as our chief, we did incident command, which helps us organize. We had a public information officer, which was our chief, and then the incident command lieutenant was Lieutenant Gale, and I was the head of the investigations. And with that, partnered with that was Lieutenant Cam Hankey.
Now, let's talk just real briefly about this rapid start system. I think Sergeant Baker, early on in this case, talked about the operation, how it worked. And this was something that obviously was brought to the table by who, the Michigan State Police?
Michigan State Police used it. We have our own reporting system. So when we take a number or take a report, it's generated from Muskegon County Dispatch, and then we write the report, and that's kind of how it goes. I didn't realize how many tips or what kind of tips we were going to get, so I was thinking we could still go under that report system. And they told me, no, it's not going to be able to handle that. So what we did is the state police brought in it's like a computer system, their own computer file, and it's called Rapid Start, which is kind of basic. We don't use that anymore, but they have tip sheets. And so we started manning the phones at the Norton Shores Police Department. We had people on call or, working at 24/7 for the first, I'd say, 2 months, along with silent observer tips that came in through the silent observer. So they would write out what the tip was. They had assigned a number to it, whoever's taking the call. The information would go to whoever's running the rapid start system, which would have been either Detective Swanker or Sergeant Davis at the time. I look at it, or multiple people look at it, and then we rate it if it's low, medium, or high. And if it's something that we can follow up on, plate numbers or people's names, then we kind of rated it as medium and high, and then we assign it to the officers, or then we give it to the officers to go out. They would write up the notes, and if it wasn't something that they were going to follow up on, or there was nothing immediate that we had to go after, they would place it in a basket, I guess, for it to be entered into the system.
And that's kind of how that system worked, and
Yes, sir.
And then that seemed to provide some organization for you as investigators as those tips were coming in.
Yes, sir.
Now, I guess let's stay on that level of thinking here for just a second. Over the course of this investigation, how many tips did you guys receive?
Anywhere from, it's somewhere around 2,200.
So 2,200 tips came in during the course of the investigation,
That's correct.
And you were trying to do your best to follow up on all those tips and leads?
Yes, sir. A few of them, some of them we don't have plate numbers. We have, it would be a general description of a van going down the road, or a blonde female that they saw in Texas, things that, that we couldn't follow up on, and others that we did have, information to follow up on.
Now, Sergeant Baker testified that he was actually coming in on his off time to assist. Was that kind of normal course during that time frame?
So we had investigators, maybe between 15 and 20 investigators that were always every day, like myself, and state police lended, and the county sheriff's department lended hand. Also, so did Kentwood Police Department, Ottawa County Sheriff's Department. So they would give us, basically loan us officers or loan us detectives. And maybe they'd loan a couple detectives for 3-4 weeks. With our department, basically, it was me and another detective, and that's all we had in the bureau at the time. So the officers, our road patrol officers, work 12-hour shifts. So they might be on for a couple of days, and they're off for a couple of days. So their off days, they would come in and then help assist with the investigations and run down tips. But once their 2 days are up, or their days off were up, they'd go back on the road and work. So they were always kind of interchanging.
Now, this investigation expands for over 3 years.
Yes, it does.
And I got to believe, certainly at some point in time, over that 3-year time period, the task force maybe dwindles a little bit, but does how you're handling this investigation ever, I guess, waver?
No, I mean, by, I'd say September of 2013, everybody, they work for their own agencies, they have to go back. And, you're still working on tips, and people would still work on things, but basically, I kept with the investigation, kept following up along with my other duties, and keep working what I thought was, important information to follow up on.
The work of the task force and then later on your own investigators, did you ever develop, potential leads that you thought at the time might lead to something?
Multiple times. We, multiple times. I'd say between 25 and 30, I call them investigations, where they're serious investigations, following up on people that really had to be investigated and checked into. Yes.
So, we're kind of giving this the Reader's Digest version, Lieutenant, but you interviewed hundreds of people.
Oh, yeah. Hundreds of people, yes.
And followed up on several. You talked about this little group of 7 or so that were considered to be, kind of important leads or leads that you thought might lead somewhere. But on top of that, there were probably other leads and other things that, maybe didn't lead anywhere, but you followed up on it anyways. Is that?
Well, that's what Rapid Start was for a little bit, too. I know it's hard to follow, but we have that's Rapid Start system and then our own reporting system. But that's what you would do. You'd take the tip, and then if you followed up on it. So let's just say, a lot of, we took 800 and I'd say 810, 815 tips on vans, just vans, silver vans or any van. So you would track it down. One tip I remember we were doing was a white van at the Grand Rapids, in Grand Rapids Airport, that came back washed and cleaned, and they thought it was suspicious. So we went out there and checked through it, followed up on who had it, and where it was, and all that kind of stuff. So we didn't put that in a report. We followed up and we wrote it down on the tip sheet, and then it was ultimately entered in.
Now, obviously, again, you lived this investigation for these last 3 years, plus years. You sat with me during the course of this trial. Susan Follett and Eric Barber, for lack of a better way to describe them, were somewhat eyewitnesses to this particular case, correct?
Yes, sir. They're eyewitnesses to the van leaving the scene, right where we found the part and the blood. That was one of the causes to believe that we had some foul play going on at that time. And, that's one of the reasons why we started the task force, and the investigation took off.
Now, through the course, as you're getting these tips or these leads, you're investigating them, and you're, maybe you thinking you're getting somewhere. Did either one of them, Ms. Follett or Mr. Barber, play a role at all in assisting you guys in determining whether or not you're going in the right direction or not?
Yes, not so much Mr. Barber. I really dealt a lot with Susan Follett. Susan made the statement that when I was, on scene that very first night, that she goes, it was nobody she had recognized as a customer. So with that, you're asking, could you ID? And she goes, I believe I could, but it wasn't somebody. She goes, I always recognize customers. And she goes, it was somebody I didn't recognize. So when we had a name come up, or I'm investigating somebody, and one of the last things I might do would say, hey, do you know this person? Have you ever seen this person before? And most of the time, she knew who I was talking about, and she would definitely tell me, no, it wasn't that person that was in the van. So, it was kind of your last bit effort, but after there was nowhere else way to go, and to kind of rule them out, ultimately, she would do that.
Okay. So she continued to be, you continued to at least maintain some contact with her through the course of the investigation?
Yes. Yes, sir.
So we talked a little bit about the number of tips you received, and how many of those 21 or 2,200 tips you received were related to the defendant?
At that time,
Yes.
we received some tips after the arrest, but before that, we received 2 tips. And the two tips were the exact same tip. One went to Silent Observer, and one was taken at our police department, written down, but they were exactly mirrored type tips. So I just say one then, ultimately.
Okay. Now, at some point in time, again, obviously we go through your situation. I'm sure because you work with law enforcement here in Muskegon County, you became aware of the Sheriff's Department's investigation in the Rebecca Bletch homicide.
Yes, sir.
And ultimately, the Sheriff's Department's investigation in the the Madison Nygaard abduction.
Yes, sir.
Now, at any point in time, or did you, we'll just take them in order here, when the Rebecca Bletch homicide happened, did you take a minute to try and see if there was any connection that you could make between that and the investigation that you were still working on?
I had talked to Captain Christensen and Detective Ferris at the time, different times, about their investigation, where they're at with it, and what they kind of had and what was going on. I wasn't part of the investigation, but I did make contact with them different times throughout the year. And at that time, there wasn't any, I didn't feel like there was any connection that I could see. I mean, they had limited stuff at their crime scene also. They didn't have any eyewitnesses to help.
So, fast forwarding then to April of 2016, Madison Nygaard happens.
Yes, sir.
Were you made aware, or at that point in time, the initial point in time, were you made aware of that investigation, what was going on?
Yes, sir. I knew about the investigation.
And was there any conversation, at least initially, about any potential ties to your investigation?
Yes, there was.
What was that?
Before we knew who it was, but a silver minivan was Town and Country. I think one of the detectives asked me if they were sure I was positive that my van was a Town and Country. They were narrowing it down to a Dodge, they thought. It was a silver van. It was a Chrysler-type product. It was a white male that tried to abduct Madison. They believed that there was a firearm involved. So, yeah, there were some things there that were going on, and they had their task force going, and I kind of I kept abreast of what was going on, but I didn't enter the investigation quite yet.
On the subject of the van, were you convinced about, at the time anyways, of what you were trying to look for as far as make and model?
No, the van, the Town and Country, I guess, for a lack of a better explanation is that, if anybody wants to blame the Town and Country, you can blame it on me at that point. But when we were trying to decipher what was going on, I'm trying to figure out, do we have foul play, and is a girl missing? And when we started going that route, she was missing, but I'm trying to put a timeline together. And so, as you heard Susan Mosley, she left the last one that saw Jessica alive, and that was probably about 10:53. Then I have this van right where Susan and Eric Barber said that it was at by the blood. A couple minutes too, as they were following it, we said they were following it and paralleling it on Sternberg. Then we came up with the video, and we were looking at it. That's why we talked to Mr. Brooks later on down the line, but I don't know enough about vans. I talked to Susan at the time, and I talked to Eric. They made the assumption that they leaped across saying, this silver van, looks a lot like her sister's that she owned. And that means Susan's sisters owned 2003, I think, Town and Country silver minivan. So from that basis right there, I guess I wasn't looking for a Town and Country. I'm looking for a product similar to that. We let it go as Town and Country, I guess, because there was between a Dodge Caravan and Town and Country, you're talking almost 40,000 vans, silver vans. So we're trying to get it narrowed down. So when tips came in, it didn't really matter if it was a Town and Country or a Dodge Caravan, even a Dodge. We searched Pontiac Montanas. We went to Ford Econolines, things that, if it was close in color, that's one thing they were positive about, the coloring of it. So we investigated all that. Once Mr. Willis was arrested, and we had that van, as you can see all those pictures, that's when I knew we had to make a determination of, is the van in Boyer Coins in Old Homestead a Dodge Caravan, or is it a Town and Country? And I'm not an expert in vans. I just know it's a minivan. That's about all I can tell you. So that was why we reached out to Chrysler and Mr. Brooks. We needed a definitive answer, and he told us that that's what it was.
Now, you heard obviously the testimony of investigative analyst Ryan Keyhouse of the Secret Service.
Yes, sir.
And he was running link analysis with Town and Countries and Dodge Caravans.
That's correct.
And so, in some respects, investigators were, as you said, you're at the point where you're looking at vans that were silver in color, probably, but the basis or the crux of some of the important link analysis were focused on Town and Countries and Dodge Caravans.
That's correct. We knew it was something that was similar to the body style of the Caravan and the Town and Country. That's one thing we do know. We searched vans, and I had people telling me, we do know this for a fact by the testimony of Susan and Eric, that the hatch went up. That's one thing I do know. And so we kind of ruled out vans when we got on scene, when the doors opened out. We knew that wasn't possible. They were positive about that. They were positive about silver. So when I showed up and it had red all over it, and maybe yellow, I'm pretty sure that they would have known the difference of that. So you can rule that kind of stuff out. But yeah, it was exactly what, when Ryan came on to work with us, we didn't decipher anyway. We included everything.
So, defendant gets arrested, May of 16. At that point, are you making any connections at all to your case?
So on that day, I was at my office, and Detective Sergeant Sparks contacted me and said that they had made the arrest. They were doing a search warrant on the vehicle, the Dodge Caravan. They were doing a search warrant out at his house on Sheridan, and they found what they thought, or they believed, and his words was, there was a rape kit that they just took out of the van. You need to come over here. So I went over there at the EOC where they were doing the search warrant. I stood back, I watched, took my notes, and we talked about the case. I talked about it to the investigators, which would then Captain Christensen and Detective Ferris and a couple other people that were involved with the Nygaard situation. They were kind of giving me the background and filling in what they had done up to that point to make that arrest. From that point on, I'm making connections, but after 5 years or 3 years, I'm a little pessimistic. I've been down this road multiple times, so I want to see what the evidence is going to provide. And I waited for the evidence to come out over the course of the next 2 months. That evidence started to, I putting the pieces together for our case, the Harrington case.
So, obviously, you did, at that point in time, you learning of the discovery of this Walther P-22?
Yes, knowing that we have a gun sight, laser sight that was at our scene, with batteries that has been testified to, we knew that it was to that. We did the information, we knew it was to a laser. Whose gun, what gun, I don't know. Up until that time when they told me that a Walther 22 had been taken out and recovered in the van. Understand something, this is the investigation dealing with Nygaard, so it's not like I come in, I take over. They had their task force already going, so I'm kind of tailing along, and I'm the last guy in, basically, as they're doing their investigation and putting their cases together, too. So it was sent to, obviously, DNA and then fingerprints or vice versa, whatever they do, and then it goes to Lieutenant Crump. They know that the serial numbers were filed off. So to raise those serial numbers and then get the owner of the gun was told to one of the detectives at the County Sheriff's Department. This is basically a couple weeks in, maybe a week or so in. They raised it. They ran the numbers, which came back registered to Michelle Shintala, who testified here. The information from the detectives, County Sheriff's Department contacted me and said you might want to contact her or call her to see if this connection of the laser sight and her gun, if there is any connection at all. And so that's what one of my first follow-ups was dealing and interviewing Ms. Shintala.
Okay. Obviously, you conducted that interview.
Yes, sir.
We don't need to go over what she told you, but were you able to then, was there a connection, or did you determine a connection between her gun, the P-22, and the laser sight cover found at your scene?
Absolutely. So I went out to the house along with a sergeant from our department, and went out there, knocked on the door. She comes out to the door. We talked about the gun. She thought maybe it was still around. She didn't realize it was stolen. And then one of the questions was, my question was there any attachments to your gun? And I think her answer was yes or absolutely. And I asked her what kind of attachments are there on this gun, and she said it had a laser sight. Which then, I guess, for the first time, I would say in 3.5 years, the focus of having real evidence tied into somebody became real for me.
Okay. Now, obviously, at this point in time, are you becoming a little more invested, if you will, in the NYGARD investigation and what investigators are doing at that point in time?
Yes, sir. Then we start how it is at the task force. I became then, wasn't relieved of my duties at the department, but I was able to go to the task force meetings, and then what we do is we meet in the morning and go over the information and, what follow-up. Now, basically at this point, with Mr. Willis being a prime suspect in 3 different crimes, you have different lead detectives dealing with NYGARD, dealing with Rebecca Bletch, and then I was representing Miss Jessica Herringa case. So we're doing parallel investigations, but sharing the information that could help us all out.
Ultimately, as some of the forensics comes through, certainly the computer forensics and whatnot, are you starting to make connections at that point in time?
Yes. Well, then, we did search warrants. I was not at the search warrants dealing with the house or at Bailey. That was done prior to me. But I knew that computers and thumb drives were located and taken back to computer crime lab, and they were going through it. And one of the calls that I got from the computer crime labs was that they found files under Jessica Lynn Herringa. And in those files was pictures, as we saw, collage of pictures, pornographic images, child porn, and different things like that. So then there was some coding, that deciphered the coding where it was, I think Mr. McCarthy was talking about D as in 4 and that encrypted code. They found that and different things that I was starting to believe, leading me to believe, okay, we have the gun cut part, and then now we have files that were found in his computer.
And as all these investigations are sort of coming into one, essentially moving forward, as you look back on the various leads and whatnot that you've testified to here previously, do you recall anything being as strong or stronger than what you were seeing develop?
Never. We had people that we suspected, we had people that looked good for it, but then they were always alibied out, or it just didn't make sense. The crime itself wouldn't make sense, and that happened most of the time. I can give you story after story after story, but I'd have investigators and and come in and go, it has to be this person, has to be this person, but we could never, there was always a couple pieces missing that didn't make sense. And when, that's why I guess I was very cautious in the investigation and not to jump on the bandwagon and say that, yep, he's our guy, Mr. Willis is our guy. I was waiting for information and waiting for things to be confirmed before, it really started dawning on me that he was involved with my disappearance.
As an investigator of this case and having been invested in it now for over 3 years, 3+ years, were you, I guess, how would you classify, let's strike that answer, or strike that question. You've been invested in this investigation for a long time. And as things were slowly progressing and then ultimately coming to its ultimate conclusion, did you feel comfortable where your investigation was going as far as relation to the defendant?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to that. Quite frankly, I don't know what relevance it has, whether or not he feels comfortable with the decision. Is asking for him to add an opinion and a conclusion as inappropriate.
Well, when you say feels comfortable, it does sound like that's, you're calling for an opinion.
Okay,
So I'll sustain the objection.
fair enough. I guess I'm satisfied with your first answer, Lieutenant. Let's talk a little bit about, there's been some conversation about this diary, that Jessica kept a diary.
Yes, sir.
Were you aware of that?
I became aware of it through the family, and then I contacted Dakota about the diary. I would say, January of 2014, and he did say that she kept a diary, and he had it at home, and he turned it over to me.
All right.
Yes, sir.
And as part of your investigation, then, did you kind of pour through the pages of that diary?
Well, yeah, you're looking for leads at that time. This is obviously pre any arrest, and you're looking for any leads to this, and hopefully that somebody maybe jot something down that she was being bothered or harassed or whatever it is, or maybe names in the diary. But yeah, I went through it a few times, read it through a few times.
And, I've never kept a diary. I know some people do. Some people are very religious about it. They will write every day their thoughts and feelings, and some are not. What was your impression with this particular diary as it relates to Jessica's, I guess, how many times she was writing in it?
Well, she probably wrote, there'd be a couple days in a row or a few days in that week she would write, and then there'd be a couple months where she'd skip. And how she writes it is in her writings on that page, she'll write the month, and then down here the day, and then over here the year. It's not like Dear Diary, it wasn't anything like that. And then here's the date up here. So you have to kind of find the date itself. So you might have days in a row that she'd write, and then all of a sudden nothing for a month, nothing for 6 weeks, and boom, she's back writing again. And she was, ultimately a really beautiful writer. She was a poet. She loved writing poems in there. Her thoughts, her feelings, maybe her daily stresses, her monthly stresses. I'm just interpreting that writing itself.
So back when you received it, reviewed it, and analyzed it, and studied it, did you find anything of value that could help push your investigation in a direction?
Ultimately, no. It was everything that we'd already learned about her, maybe her and her fiance or her boyfriend at the time, Dakota. There wasn't anything that I learned that I didn't already know about her other than she was a good writer. It talks about problems, personal problems, relationship problems, to, wishing for a better life and how she can get from, how to better herself, how to take care of her boy. And I'd say throughout the whole diary, a lot of writings about her boy, Zevin, that, this is the greatest thing that ever happened to me, and, the best decision I ever made was having my boy, and he's my life, and all that kind of stuff. that stands out the most.
So, did you find anything in there talking about, wanting to run away and start a new life and not tell anybody?
Well, yeah, I found that. I did find that. It was things that I wanted to get away. Basically what you said, but there was no plan like, okay, I'm squirreling away some money and hopefully by this date I can make my breakaway or anything like that. There was no plan itself. I think that, I hate to say this, but I think it's a lot of the same things that we all go through in life, one day, and the next day, one day I'm fed up with this, I want to go up to a cabin in the north and not be bothered ever again. I have those daily thoughts all the time. But the next day or a week later, somebody will she'll write in there that, life is good and life is sweet and, it will be a reverse or an opposite. So, yeah, she had those thoughts.
Sure. I guess that's a really good answer to kind of a poorly worded question. Did you see a progression, in other words, where she started as bad, 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 and just got progressively worse towards the end of the writings? Or was it that fluctuation of having a good day, then having a bad day, and maybe 2 good days?
I think that's a perfect assessment. It was, bad days, good days, dreams, and, I'm never going to reach my dreams. One day is good and one day is bad. But, yeah, that's about right.
Any poems or writings about, leaving her son behind?
No. There was no readings, there was no writings that I saw or that I remember of I want to leave my son, and I'm always just about wanting to provide a better life. I want it better for him than what I had, or I don't want to be a disappointment in his life, so how do I make things better?
It seems like you kind of classified this that, she considered her son her world.
Yes, absolutely.
And not a mistake, but one of the best things that ever happened to her.
That's perfect characterization of it, yes.
All right. Just a couple of things that we've gone through during the course of this.
I think probably this would be a good time to take a break.
Sure, that's fine.
Take a 10-minute break.
14th Circuit Court resumes. Please be seated.
Willis, we are at, as I've been told, the prosecutor's last witness, and we would be able to finish this witness today, but I'm advised that some of the jurors are not feeling well, and I don't want to embarrass anybody, so we will have to conclude the proceedings for today. And I've conferred with the attorneys about our schedule tomorrow, and so I'm going to, you know, for those who are not feeling well, I'm going to let you sleep in tomorrow. We're not going to start until 10 o'clock, okay? But when we start at 10, we're going to roll tomorrow, okay? We're going to get through this. We're going to have witnesses in the morning, and then we're going to have closing arguments and instructions in the afternoon, and we're going to get the case to you. So, you know, I know some of you have needed medication today, and I would bring that with you, okay, when you come tomorrow, because we're gonna be moving along and try to bring this to a conclusion. When I say bring it to a conclusion, I mean the trial. Now, once we put it in your hands, you folks take as long as you need, be here as long as you need to be. But we are gonna try to conclude the case tomorrow. So that's why we won't start till 10. Everybody should be refreshed and ready to go. I hope you feel better. I don't know which jurors are not feeling ill, but I hope you feel better. I know there's a lot of stuff going around out there. So we'll call it a date now and give you some extra time in the morning, and then let's be ready to go in the morning. And I hope you have a pleasant evening. I hope you feel better, whoever those are that are not feeling well. Please don't look at any media accounts of this, and don't discuss the case, and we'll see you back here in the morning at 10 o'clock. More on the record.
We do not, Your Honor.
On the record.